Good evening, and welcome to the show. Today we're going to be watching Late Night with the Devil, where we'll dive into Night Owl, a long-forgotten and fictional television program hosted by a man named Jack Delroy. In this movie, we'll explore the final episode of Night Owl and watch as guest stars who are experts in the paranormal try to prove or disprove the existence of ghosts or other otherworldly anomalies. But as interviews and events play out before us, we must ask, are the things we're seeing real, or is it all just an elaborate hoax? Well, let's find out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and be warned, because there will be spoilers ahead.
Late Night with the Devil.
Night Owls got its start in 1971, with its chosen host being a man named Jack Delroy, who was a radio host until this breakout into TV. His show quickly becomes popular, and a year later, the show is nominated for an Emmy, and it's inching towards that #1 slot. This whole time, Jack's wife Madeline is by his side, and they're considered one of the happiest couples in show business. We learn that he's a member of a men's-only club called The Grove that meets in the Redwood Forest in California. While there are rumors of this club's involvement in the arcane, the only real truth of it is that it helps to build a support system that can make or break a career. 4 years into the show's runtime, it's still not #1, and Jack's whole world is turned upside down when his wife is diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Shortly before she passes away, Jack has her on the show.
He's blushing right now. How's a girl not supposed to fall in love like that?
This episode becomes the highest rated episode in Night Owl's history, and 2 weeks later, she passes away. Jack goes underground for a month, but he does return to Night Owls, only to have the show's ratings slowly begin to fall as his show's renewal contract is coming to an end. So, in a final desperate act, Jack plans an episode to hopefully turn his ratings around, and this is that episode.
Live from UBC Studios in New York City, it's Night Owls with Jack Delroy. Joining us on our...
This episode takes place on Halloween night, and it starts as most of Night Owl's shows do, with Jack and his co-host Gus sharing in some light banter.
Woo! I don't get that joke, Jack.
Oh, well. I guess we're gonna have to raise the bar to Gus's standards now, folks.
The theme of this episode quickly becomes apparent, especially when they bring on their first guest, a psychic named Christo. Christo claims that he can tune into the energy of the dead and speak on their behalf. His performance is lackluster at first.
No, her name was Helen.
There was no Beth or Betty?
Correct.
There was a Betty.
No, you're correct. There was no Beth or Betty.
A name starting with B.
Oh, my name's Barry.
That's not it.
But then, he seems to tune into a spirit of a boy named Edmund, who was the son of one of the audience members there. He's able to answer a few questions about the boy and pass on a final message saying that he is at peace and he's sorry for the suffering that his death has caused. And it's clear by the mother's reaction that this is the spirit of her son that's communicating through Christo at this very moment.
Now I'm hearing the word Papa.
When Edmund was little, he had a teddy named Papa.
This is true.
I remember.
Just as Christo's act is finishing up, he suddenly gets a message from another spirit, only this time, he reacts violently and he begins to scream. He says that he's getting a message from someone named Minnie. No one in the audience reacts to the name, but Christo insists as the spirit invades his mind, causing his eyes to cloud until it suddenly vanishes and they cut to a commercial break. When they come back, Christo still isn't looking great, and they introduce the next guest of the show, a man named Mr. Carmichael Haig, a magician and skeptic in all things paranormal.
Come on. I'm right here.
Carmichael is clearly based off of the real-life James Randi, who was also a skeptic in all things paranormal. And just like Randi, Carmichael is offering money, in fact $500,000 in this case, for scientific proof of the paranormal. During this interview, Carmichael exposes Christo as a fake. He reminds the audience of the psychic's initial failures with his first readings, and he also exposes the fact that he had an assistant gathering information from the audience before the show started. And among that gathered information was that from the woman whose son Christo claimed to speak for. Christo begins to storm off stage, but Jack stands up and says that the psychic did actually connect to a spirit because that final reading, the one from someone named Minnie, was likely meant for him.
Minnie is the private nickname for Madeline, my wife.
When Carmichael tries to argue against this, Christo suddenly begins to cough before he collapses and vomits up a strange black liquid, and the show cuts again to commercial. Behind the scenes, we see Christo is being rushed to the hospital, and then the show returns a few minutes later with its next guest. Having done extensive research and study in the potential realism of the paranormal is Dr. June Ross Mitchell, and the subject of her recent book and her current study and practice is a girl who claims to be possessed named Lily. Lily was found in a burned down house that used to be run by a cult, and ever since she's been hospitalized due to strange behaviors. But Dr. June has been able to make a connection with Lily and help her during her strange fits of apparent possession. Lily is strange. She constantly stares into the camera, seemingly seeing past the lens and staring directly at the people who are watching her. She answers questions with vague implications, hinting that Jack and June may be interested in each other, and hinting that Jack might be harboring a secret that very few are aware of.
And you needn't worry about your TV show. I think you're going to be very famous soon.
Why, thank you for the reassurance.
During the interview, Carmichael and June argue about the validity of her research on this possible demonic possession.
You have a name for this thing that lives inside of you.
I call him Mr. Wriggles.
And why do you call him that?
He kind of wriggles his way inside my head, and then he wriggles his way out.
Lily says that Mr. Wriggles is in the studio with them tonight, and against June's arguing against the idea, both Jack and Lily convince her to allow them to summon the demon after a quick commercial break.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for a live television first, as we attempt to commune with the devil.
When they cut to commercial break, we see a bit from behind the scenes, and we learn that Christo died on his way to the hospital. Jack and the producer decide that it's best not to worry the audience, so they keep this news to themselves. And we return just a few moments later, with Lily and June ready for the summoning.
May I speak to the one you know as Mr. Wriggles?
Lily begins to convulse, and when she speaks, her eyes have changed color, and she talks with multiple voices.
What have you done to me, Doctor?
We mean you no harm. We brought you into this realm to better understand your purpose.
On her face appear wounds that weren't there before, and she turns to Jack and says that she recognizes him, that they've met before, a statement that Jack responds to with confusion. The demon begins to taunt Jack and June. When June touches her arm, Lily's face seems to morph into something that is far more animal than human, and this causes June to go to her last resort. She pulls out an amulet and chants at the possessed girl until it gets strangely quiet and turns to address Jack again.
How could you let it happen?
Lily begins to float into the air, and when her chair lands, the demon seems to vanish and the girl's possession is ended. Carmichael stands to point out the oddities that he noticed, but first, they cut to a quick commercial break. During this break, June confronts Jack about something that the demon said about how it had met Jack once before in a place with tall trees, but Jack insists that he's just as clueless about this as she is. Also, Carmichael learns that Christo has died, but he can't process this news at this time because it's time for the show to continue. To disprove Lily's possession, Carmichael decides to put on a demonstration using the co-host Gus as his volunteer.
My wife likes the way my head sits on my shoulders, Mr. Haig. I hope you're not planning to,
Make it spin? Oh, I plan to make everybody's head spin.
When the two sit down, Carmichael speaks in a comforting, relaxed voice. He pulls out a pocket watch and shows it to Gus and the audience. After a few seconds, he puts the watch away and asks Gus about his fears. It turns out that Gus has a phobia of worms.
Isn't it obvious? They're such ugly, slimy things. No arms, no legs, no eyes.
Indeed.
Carmichael clicks his fingers, and Gus suddenly goes stiff and begins to respond to questions in an odd monotone voice. Gus takes off his coat as it's beginning to get hot in the studio. A shaving wound on his neck starts to bleed, but when he touches it, Gus pulls a worm out of his wound. He shouts that he can feel something wriggling inside of him, and he takes off his shirt before ripping open his stomach, and Jack and the studio audience scream as they see hundreds of worms begin to spill out of him. Gus then crawls onto a chair and his eye begins to bulge and a gigantic worm bursts from his skin. But, with one final command, Carmichael tells Gus to awaken and everyone goes quiet. Jack stands and demands to know what happened, and then Carmichael reveals the truth. It turns out that he's an expert in hypnosis, and he's developed a way to mass hypnotize a large group. Using this method, he was able to put everyone in the studio into a shared trance that allowed him to trick their minds into seeing the things that he was describing. As proof that nothing that we saw really happened, Carmichael has the studio replay the last few minutes of the show, and we see that there were never any worms at all. Gus never tore open his belly or had a worm burst from his eye. This was all just a trick of hypnosis, the same trick that he believes June used to fool us all into seeing Lily's previous possession.
That is not the way I remember it.
When Carmichael calls out June and Lily, Lily speaks up and says that if replaying the clips is all the proof that he'll need, then they should just replay Lily's possession to see if we were secretly hypnotized. They replay the possession, but nothing changes. Carmichael stares at the screen in disbelief as his theory of hypnosis is disproven by his own merit. In the replay, Jack notices a screen glitch as the demon is speaking to him. He has the crew slow the clip down and go frame by frame until, for a single moment, the ghost of his wife appears at his side, her hand resting on his shoulder. A stunned Jack stares at the image as Lily begins to break down, crying. He's not sure what to do, so he calls for a stagehand to come and help her. But when he places a hand onto her arm, Lily glows with a strange static, and the lights in the studio go out. They come back on to show Lily standing and screaming. Her head splits open down the middle and reveals an ethereal light shining from within her. Gus pulls out his cross to ward off the apparent demon, but she twists her head and snaps the man's neck. June tries to force the demon out with her amulet, but the demon then uses that same amulet to pull June off of the ground and cut deep into her neck. Carmichael falls to his knees and begins to offer up his soul to the demon that he now knows is completely real, but she just stares at him and causes his skin to burn and melt. Jack runs from the stage as the cameras go off. When they come back on, we see a confused-looking Jack being played on as an episode of Night Owls begins.
How did I get here?
The studio audience laugh as he stumbles around the stage. The scenes then rapidly begin to flash to previous performances of the show, but Jack is still there, just as confused and lost as to what is going on.
You're dead.
Jack then comes to once again, only this time he's somewhere in between reality and a memory. Members of the Grove are all dressed in owl costumes, helping him to his feet and escorting him to their leader. The man says that his show has reached critical success, and now Jack's sacrifices must be made. He kneels to an owl deity and drinks from a goblet, only for the scene to change and show Minnie lying on her deathbed. Minnie begs Jack to end her suffering and motions to a dagger sitting on her bedside. Jack lifts the knife and stabs, only to scream as the scene changes once again to show him standing above Lily amongst the bodies of his guests. With the sound of sirens in the distance slowly getting closer, the broadcast of Night Owls and this movie ends. Late Night with the Devil is a fantastic movie. The way that it's presented to us as a long-lost episode of late-night TV gives off a really fun and pseudo-realistic atmosphere. The story and the mystery build up naturally as the interviews and the performances of the guests begin to play off of each other. On rewatches, it's fun to see how many clues are actually laid out in front of us about Jack and his dealings with the Grove, which lead to possible implications of his wife's unnatural death and his show's unnatural building and popularity. You can also see the ghost of Minnie appear in quite a few scenes, so it's a really fun thing to watch out for. All in all, Late Night with the Devil is one of the best horror movies that I've seen in recent years, and I think it easily deserves a 9 out of 10. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and comment down below what you thought about Late Night with the Devil. A huge thanks to my YouTube members. Thank you guys so much for the extra support. I love you. But, yeah, that's it. Bye-bye.
Elizabeth.
No, her name was Helen.
There was no Beth or Betty?
Correct.
There was a Betty.
No, you're correct. There was no Beth or Betty.
A name starting with B.
Oh, my name's Barry.
That's not it.